Stop chasing people who ignore you, because every step you take towards someone who refuses to value you is a step away from your own self-respect. The painful truth about human nature is that chasing rarely creates appreciation. It usually destroys your value. The more you pursue someone who has already chosen distance, the more power you hand over to them. But the moment you stop chasing, everything begins to change. You reclaim your attention, your confidence, and your peace. This is why learning to stop chasing people who ignore you is one of the most powerful decisions you will ever make. The hardest truth about human nature is that the more desperately you chase someone who has chosen to ignore you, the more you reduce your own value in their eyes. This has nothing to do with your intelligence, your kindness, or your worth as a person. It has everything to do with psychology. People instinctively observe behavior, and behavior always speaks louder than words. When your actions repeatedly communicate that you are willing to sacrifice your time, your peace, and your dignity just to receive someone's attention, you quietly tell them that your attention is less valuable than theirs. That is where the balance of power begins to shift. Most people never realize this because they confuse persistence with love and effort with loyalty. They believe that if they keep trying, keep explaining, or keep proving themselves, the other person will eventually recognize their value. But respect does not grow from endless pursuit. Respect grows when people see that you respect yourself enough to recognize when your effort is no longer being returned. There is a significant difference between fighting for a healthy relationship and chasing someone who has already made the decision to keep you at a distance. One builds connection. The other slowly destroys your confidence. Robert Greene often reminds us that people are constantly measuring strength through actions rather than intentions. You may believe you are simply showing commitment, but if your commitment exists without mutual respect, it stops looking like strength. It begins to look like emotional dependence. Human nature rarely rewards desperation because desperation communicates fear. It tells the other person that you are afraid of losing them, even if losing them means losing yourself. Once someone recognizes that fear, they gain emotional leverage without ever asking for it. Think about what happens when someone ignores your message. For a moment, nothing has really changed except the absence of a reply, yet your mind immediately begins creating stories. Maybe they are upset, maybe they are losing interest, maybe you said something wrong. Instead of focusing on your own life, you become trapped inside endless possibilities. Then you send another message, hoping to reduce your anxiety. But in reality, you are not solving the problem, you are feeding it. Every attempt to force a response gives the other person more control over your emotional state, because your peace now depends on something they choose to give or withhold. The strongest people refuse to live this way. They understand that attention is one of the most valuable resources they possess. Every minute spent chasing someone who has repeatedly ignored them is a minute stolen from building a better future. Instead of asking, "How can I make this person notice me?" they begin asking a far more powerful question: why am I investing so much energy in someone who has shown so little interest in investing it back? That single question changes everything. It shifts your focus from seeking approval to protecting your self-respect. There is another lesson hidden within this reality. People reveal their priorities through consistent actions, not occasional words. Anyone can promise change when they fear losing access to you. Anyone can offer temporary attention when it benefits them, but consistent behavior reveals the truth. If someone repeatedly ignores your presence while expecting you to remain available, they are showing you exactly how they value the relationship. Powerful people pay attention to these patterns. They stop making excuses for behavior that has already become predictable. Instead of arguing with reality, they accept it and make decisions that protect their peace. This does not mean you become bitter or stop caring about people. It simply means you stop forcing connections that require you to abandon your own dignity. Self-respect is not loud. It does not demand recognition. It quietly walks away from situations where appreciation no longer exists. It understands that your value does not increase because someone finally notices you. Your value has always existed. The only mistake was believing that another person's attention was required to prove it. Ironically, The moment you stop chasing is often the moment you begin finding clarity. The emotional noise starts fading. Your thoughts become calmer. Your energy returns to your goals, your growth, and your own future instead of revolving around someone else's decisions. Whether the other person changes or not becomes less important because you are no longer measuring your happiness by their response. That is the beginning of real freedom. You stop asking people to choose you because you have finally chosen yourself. Never forget this principle. People who genuinely value your presence rarely force you to compete for their attention. Healthy relationships are built on mutual effort, mutual respect, and mutual appreciation. When all the effort comes from one side, the relationship slowly becomes a burden rather than a source of strength. Walking away from that imbalance is not giving up. It is refusing to lose yourself while trying to keep someone who has already shown you where you stand. And once you stop chasing people who ignore you, the next step is learning how emotional detachment protects your peace. Because no one can manipulate a person whose self-worth is no longer tied to another person's attention. The moment you stop chasing people who ignore you, another challenge immediately appears. Even if your actions have changed, your emotions often have not. Your hands may no longer be sending messages, but your mind is still waiting for one. You may stop calling them, but you continue wondering whether they miss you. This is where most people fail. They believe that walking away is enough, when in reality, the greatest battle is learning how to detach emotionally. Because as long as your happiness depends on someone else's attention, they still hold power over you, even if they are no longer part of your life. Emotional detachment is often misunderstood. Many people think it means becoming cold, heartless, or incapable of loving others. But that is not true. Real emotional detachment means refusing to let another person's choices determine your self-worth. It means accepting that you cannot control who stays, who leaves, or who chooses to value you. The only thing you can truly control is how you respond. And the moment you understand this, you begin taking back the power you unknowingly gave away. Robert Greene repeatedly shows that the strongest individuals are not those who control other people. They are the ones who control themselves. Human nature is predictable in one important way. People instinctively test emotional boundaries. Some will ignore you to see if you chase them. Some will withdraw attention to see if you panic. Others will create distance simply to measure how much influence they have over your emotions. They may never admit it, but their actions reveal the truth. If every small change in their behavior immediately changes your emotional state, they learn that your peace depends on them. That knowledge gives them power they never earned. Think about how often people become prisoners of their own thoughts after being ignored. They replay conversations again and again, searching for a mistake they may never have made. They imagine different outcomes. They convince themselves that one more message, one more explanation, or one more chance will somehow change everything. Days turn into weeks, and their attention remains trapped by someone who has already chosen distance. They are physically moving forward, but mentally they remain standing in the same place. This is why emotional attachment can become more destructive than rejection itself. It keeps you emotionally connected to someone who is no longer emotionally connected to you. Powerful people understand something different. They realize that closure is not always something another person gives you. Sometimes closure is a decision you make for yourself. It is the moment you stop asking why someone failed to appreciate your presence and start asking how you can appreciate your own life again. That shift changes everything. Instead of spending your energy trying to understand another person's behavior, you begin investing that energy into becoming stronger, wiser, and more disciplined. You stop living in their world and return to building your own. One of the greatest mistakes people make is believing that their value decreases because someone ignored them. But another person's inability to recognize your worth does not reduce your worth. It only reveals their priorities. Imagine carrying a diamond into a room where no one understands its value. The diamond does not become less precious simply because the people around it fail to appreciate it. Its value remains the same. In the same way, your character Integrity and potential do not disappear because one person chooses not to see them. The mistake is not being ignored. The mistake is allowing someone else's opinion to become the measure of your identity. This is why emotional detachment creates genuine confidence. Confidence is not believing everyone will like you. Confidence is knowing that you will be completely fine even if they do not. It is understanding that rejection is not proof of your inadequacy. It is often proof that two people simply belong on different paths. The strongest individuals do not waste their lives trying to force every door to open. When a door remains closed, despite sincere effort, they stop knocking. They turn around and continue walking toward opportunities that welcome their presence instead of questioning it. There is another powerful psychological truth. The less dependent you become on external validation, the more emotionally stable you become. Praise no longer controls your ego, and criticism no longer destroys your confidence. Someone's silence no longer creates panic because your peace is no longer borrowed from other people. You wake up each morning with direction that comes from within instead of waiting for someone else to determine your mood. That kind of inner stability is impossible to manipulate because it is built on self-respect rather than approval. This does not mean you stop caring about relationships. Healthy relationships remain one of life's greatest blessings, but healthy relationships are built on mutual effort, not emotional dependence. They encourage growth instead of insecurity. They create peace instead of constant anxiety. They are based on choice rather than desperation. The moment a relationship requires you to constantly abandon your dignity just to keep it alive, it has already become something that no longer serves your future. When you finally master emotional detachment, you discover a freedom that chasing could never provide. You stop begging for attention because you realize your attention is far too valuable to waste on people who refuse to appreciate it. You stop fearing rejection because your identity is no longer tied to another person's acceptance. And once your emotions are no longer controlled by those who ignore you, the next step is learning the power of silence, because what you choose not to say often reveals more strength than anything you could ever explain. Once you stop chasing people who ignore you and begin mastering emotional detachment, there is one habit that will protect your peace more than almost anything else: the discipline of silence. Most people believe that every misunderstanding deserves an explanation, every rejection deserves another conversation, and every cold response deserves one more attempt to fix the situation. But human nature rarely works that way. The more you try to convince someone to value you after they have repeatedly shown indifference, the more you weaken your own position. There comes a point when silence becomes far more powerful than words, because silence refuses to beg for what should have been freely given: respect. One of the greatest mistakes people make after being ignored is believing they can change someone's feelings through endless explanations. They write long messages trying to prove their intentions. They defend every action, answer every accusation, and desperately hope that if the other person finally understands them, everything will return to the way it was. But genuine respect is not created by explanations. If someone truly values your presence, honest communication can strengthen the relationship. If they have already decided to ignore you, however, another explanation usually changes very little. Instead of creating understanding, it often creates the impression that you are afraid of losing their approval. Robert Greene often teaches that mystery carries a unique form of influence. Human beings are naturally curious about what they cannot completely understand. The moment you stop explaining yourself to people who have already stopped listening, you interrupt a pattern they expected. They anticipated another message, another apology, another attempt to hold on. Instead, they find silence. Not a silence born from anger or revenge, but a silence born from self-respect. That difference changes everything. You are no longer trying to control their opinion. You are simply refusing to waste your energy where it no longer has value. Think about how often people lose arguments they never needed to join. Someone misunderstands them, spreads an opinion, or questions their worth, and immediately they feel the need to respond. Before long, They are trapped in conversations that steal hours, days, or even months of emotional energy. The problem is not the disagreement itself. The problem is believing that every person deserves access to your explanation. Powerful people understand that not every opinion requires a response, and not every misunderstanding deserves correction. Sometimes the strongest answer is allowing your character to speak louder than your words. Silence is often mistaken for weakness because it looks passive from the outside. In reality, silence demands extraordinary discipline. It requires you to control the urge to defend yourself, the desire to win every argument, and the temptation to force another person to see your value. Anyone can react emotionally. Very few people can remain calm when their ego is challenged. That calmness is what separates emotionally mature individuals from those who are constantly controlled by the behavior of others. There is another psychological truth hidden within silence. Every emotional reaction teaches people how to influence you. If someone ignores you and you immediately chase them, they learn that distance makes you pursue. If someone criticizes you and you instantly defend yourself, they learn that criticism controls your attention. If someone withdraws their approval and you panic, they learn that your confidence depends on their acceptance. But when your response is calm, measured, and intentional, those patterns begin to disappear. People can no longer predict your emotions because your decisions are no longer driven by fear. This does not mean you should refuse healthy communication. Silence should never replace honesty in relationships built on mutual respect. If someone genuinely cares about you and a misunderstanding occurs, mature conversation is often the best solution. But there is a difference between communicating with someone who wants understanding and repeatedly explaining yourself to someone who has already chosen indifference. One builds trust. The other slowly destroys your dignity. Wisdom lies in recognizing the difference. Another reason silence is so powerful is that it creates space for reality to reveal itself. When you stop chasing, stop explaining, and stop forcing conversations, people's true intentions become impossible to hide. Those who genuinely value you will make an effort to understand. Those who only appreciated your constant attention will quietly disappear. Although that realization may hurt, it also brings clarity. Clarity is always more valuable than false hope because it allows you to invest your life in relationships that are based on mutual respect instead of one-sided effort. Many people fear silence because they mistake it for losing. They believe that if they stop talking, stop explaining, or stop chasing, they have somehow admitted defeat. But real defeat is losing yourself while trying to convince someone else to recognize your worth. Walking away from endless explanations is not surrender. It is the decision to protect your peace instead of sacrificing it for temporary validation. The strongest people understand that dignity is preserved not by winning every conversation, but by knowing which conversations are no longer worth having. Eventually, silence becomes more than the absence of words. It becomes evidence of inner confidence. It shows that your identity no longer depends on another person's opinion and that your self-respect is stronger than your desire to be understood by everyone. When you reach that point, you no longer chase people who ignore you because your energy is invested in something far greater than their approval. And once silence becomes a reflection of your confidence instead of your pain, the next step is building a purpose so meaningful that you no longer have time to chase people who have already chosen to walk away. After you stop chasing people who ignore you, master emotional detachment, and learn the discipline of silence, there is still one question that remains. What do you do with all the time, energy, and attention you have reclaimed? If you simply stop chasing people without giving your life a new direction, you create an empty space that your old habits will eventually fill again. That is why the next step is not merely walking away from the wrong people. It is walking toward a purpose that is so meaningful it becomes impossible to waste your life chasing those who have already chosen distance. One of the greatest reasons people continue chasing others is not because they truly need those relationships. It is because they have nothing larger pulling them forward. When your life lacks purpose, every rejection feels like the center of your world. Every unanswered message becomes a major event. Every person's opinion carries more weight than it should because your identity has no stronger foundation. But when your life is driven by meaningful goals, personal growth, and a clear vision for the future, something remarkable begins to happen. Other people's decisions stop controlling your emotional state because your attention is invested in something far greater than their approval. Robert Greene often emphasizes that history's most influential people were deeply committed to a purpose beyond temporary emotions. They understood that attention is limited. Every hour spent on meaningless conflict is an hour stolen from mastery. Every day spent trying to convince someone to value you is a day not spent becoming someone whose value speaks for itself. They did not become extraordinary because they avoided rejection. They became extraordinary because they refused to allow rejection to distract them from their mission. Think about two people facing the same disappointment. Both are ignored by someone they care about. The first person spends weeks replaying conversations, checking messages, imagining different outcomes, and wondering what they could have done differently. Their life becomes trapped in a cycle of emotional dependence. The second person feels the same disappointment, but after acknowledging the pain, they return to their goals. They read, learn, train, build, create, and continue improving themselves. Months later, the difference between them is impossible to ignore. One is still waiting for validation. The other has built a stronger life because they redirected their energy instead of wasting it. This is one of the hidden truths of personal power. The energy you once used chasing people becomes the same energy that can transform your future. Imagine what would happen if every hour spent worrying about someone who ignored you was invested in learning a valuable skill, improving your health, strengthening your discipline, or creating something meaningful. The results would not appear overnight, but over time, they would completely reshape your confidence. Confidence earned through progress is far stronger than confidence borrowed from another person's attention. Many people believe success automatically attracts respect because of money, status, or recognition. Those things can certainly influence how people respond to you, but the deeper reason success changes your presence is psychological. A person with purpose carries themselves differently. They speak with more certainty because their identity is no longer dependent on being accepted by everyone they meet. They become more selective with their time because they understand its value. They stop chasing every opportunity for approval because they are already committed to something that gives their life meaning. That quiet certainty becomes visible long before success itself arrives. Purpose also protects you from emotional manipulation. Someone who has no direction can easily be distracted by criticism, rejection, or temporary praise. But someone who wakes up every day with a clear mission understands that these things are only small interruptions, not permanent obstacles. They no longer allow every emotional challenge to pull them away from what truly matters. Instead of reacting impulsively, they ask themselves one simple question: will this matter 5 years from now? Most of the time, the answer is no. That realization allows them to return their attention to the work that actually improves their future. There is another important lesson hidden within this principle. Purpose teaches patience. When your entire world revolves around one person's attention, you want immediate answers, immediate replies, immediate reassurance. But meaningful goals require long-term thinking. They remind you that real growth happens gradually through consistent effort, not emotional urgency. The more you commit yourself to becoming stronger, wiser, and more disciplined, the less attractive chasing people becomes. You begin recognizing it for what it truly is, a distraction from the life you are capable of building. This does not mean relationships lose their importance. Healthy relationships remain one of life's greatest gifts, but they should support your purpose, not replace it. The right people encourage your growth instead of competing with it. They respect your time because they understand you are building something meaningful. They do not expect you to abandon your future simply to prove your loyalty. When your purpose becomes the foundation of your life, your relationships become healthier because they are built on mutual respect rather than emotional dependence. Eventually, you reach a point where your greatest source of fulfillment no longer comes from being chosen by someone else. It comes from becoming the person you once dreamed of becoming. Every goal achieved, every discipline strengthened, and every challenge overcome quietly reminds you that your value was never hidden inside another person's approval. It was always waiting to be developed through your own actions. And once your purpose becomes stronger than your desire for validation, you naturally stop chasing people who ignore you because your future becomes far too valuable to sacrifice for those who have already shown they are unwilling to walk beside you. Once you build a life centered around purpose instead of approval, another powerful lesson begins to reveal itself. You stop asking why someone ignored you, and you start paying attention to something far more important: their actions. One of the greatest mistakes people make is believing promises more than patterns. They hold on to beautiful words while ignoring consistent behavior. But human nature has always spoken through actions. If someone repeatedly ignores your presence, delays making time for you, or only remembers you when it benefits them, they are showing you exactly where you stand. The wisest decision you can make is to stop arguing with reality and allow their distance to teach you their priorities. Many people become trapped because they fall in love with potential instead of truth. They remember the person someone used to be, the promises they once made, or the future they imagined together. Because of those memories, they continue chasing someone who has already emotionally walked away. They convince themselves that one more conversation, one more chance, or one more sacrifice will somehow restore what has already changed. But powerful people understand a painful truth. Hope should never become an excuse to ignore reality. A relationship cannot survive on one person's determination alone. It requires consistent effort from both sides. Robert Greene often reminds us that people reveal themselves over time. Anyone can create a good first impression. Anyone can say the right words when they want something, but consistency exposes true character. This is why emotionally intelligent people pay close attention to repeated behavior instead of isolated moments. A single mistake does not define a person, but a repeated pattern usually does. If someone repeatedly ignores your messages, repeatedly cancels plans, repeatedly disappears when you need them, or repeatedly expects your attention while giving very little in return, those actions deserve more attention than any apology they offer afterward. One of the greatest reasons people remain in one-sided relationships is because they mistake effort for love. They believe that if they keep giving more, the relationship will eventually become balanced. But relationships are not strengthened by endless sacrifice from one side. In fact, the more one person carries the entire emotional weight, the more unhealthy the connection becomes. Instead of creating appreciation, constant chasing often teaches the other person that they never have to contribute equally because you will always compensate for the imbalance. Think about how much emotional energy is wasted trying to maintain relationships that have already become one-sided. Every unanswered message creates anxiety. Every delayed response creates another excuse. Every broken promise is forgiven before real change ever happens. Over time, you begin lowering your own standards simply to avoid losing someone who has already stopped making you a priority. Without realizing it, you become so focused on preserving the relationship that you forget to preserve your own dignity. This is where self-respect becomes more important than attachment. Self-respect does not ask people to love you. It simply refuses to remain where love, appreciation, and effort no longer exist. It recognizes that your peace is too valuable to exchange for temporary moments of attention. Walking away from one-sided relationships is not an act of anger. It is an act of wisdom. It is the decision to stop investing your heart where your presence is repeatedly overlooked. There is another psychological truth hidden within this lesson. Every time you ignore obvious patterns, you teach yourself to distrust your own judgment. Deep inside, you already know when someone is no longer investing in the relationship. You notice the lack of effort. You notice the emotional distance. You notice that conversations have become one-sided, yet many people silence that inner voice because they fear being alone more than they fear being unappreciated. The tragedy is that they remain emotionally connected to someone who has already stopped choosing them. Powerful individuals refuse to live that way. They understand that loneliness is temporary, But abandoning your self-respect can leave wounds that last much longer. They would rather spend time alone rebuilding their confidence than spend years begging for attention from someone who only offers it when convenient. They know that peace is never found by forcing people to stay. Peace is found by accepting who genuinely wants to be part of your journey and letting go of those who repeatedly choose distance. This does not mean you become suspicious of everyone or immediately walk away after one disappointment. Healthy relationships require patience, understanding, and honest communication. Everyone makes mistakes. Everyone goes through difficult seasons. The difference is consistency. Someone who values you will communicate, make an effort, and work to rebuild trust. Someone who does not value you will continue repeating the same behavior while expecting you to continue making excuses for it. That difference is impossible to ignore once you begin paying attention to actions instead of promises. One of the greatest signs of maturity is no longer trying to convince people to make you a priority. You simply observe how they behave. If their actions consistently reflect respect, appreciation, and mutual effort, you invest in the relationship. If their actions consistently communicate indifference, you quietly step back without bitterness. You stop chasing because you understand that genuine connections never require constant pursuit. They are built through shared commitment, not one-sided sacrifice. The day you begin believing people's consistent actions instead of the stories you hope are true is the day you free yourself from unnecessary disappointment. You stop wasting years waiting for someone to become the person they have repeatedly shown they are not. Instead, you protect your peace, your dignity, and your future by accepting reality exactly as it is. And once you learn to let people's actions reveal their priorities, the final step is becoming so valuable within yourself that you never again feel the need to chase anyone for the attention they are unwilling to give. Everything we have explored leads to one final realization. The goal was never simply to stop chasing people who ignore you. Anyone can stop sending messages for a few days or create distance for a short period of time. The real transformation happens when you become the kind of person who no longer feels the need to chase anyone at all. That is the highest form of freedom. It is not built on pride, revenge, or proving someone wrong. It is built on becoming so grounded in your own value that your happiness no longer depends on another person's attention. Most people spend years trying to become more attractive to others. They ask how to be noticed, how to be chosen, or how to make someone regret losing them. But those questions keep your attention focused in the wrong direction. They make your life revolve around another person's decisions instead of your own growth. Powerful people ask different questions. They ask, how can I become someone I deeply respect? They ask, how can I build a life that gives me purpose even when no one is watching? Those questions create lasting confidence because they are built on self-mastery rather than external approval. Robert Greene often emphasizes that true influence begins with mastering yourself before attempting to influence anyone else. Human nature naturally respects individuals who are emotionally stable, disciplined, and independent. These people do not demand attention because they are not defined by it. Their confidence is visible in the way they make decisions, protect their time, and refuse to compromise their principles simply to keep someone interested. They understand that respect is not something you force from others. It is something you quietly earn through consistent behavior. Think about the strongest people you have ever admired. Chances are they were not constantly trying to impress everyone around them. They were focused. They had clear standards. They valued their time. They did not abandon their identity to fit into every situation. They were willing to lose opportunities, relationships, and approval if keeping those things required sacrificing their integrity. That quiet confidence is incredibly rare because most people are taught to seek acceptance before they seek self-respect. But the order matters. When you respect yourself first, acceptance from others becomes a bonus instead of a necessity. There is another important psychological principle at work here. People are naturally drawn to those who appear complete within themselves. This does not mean perfection. It means emotional stability. When someone senses that your happiness depends entirely on them, they often feel pressure rather than appreciation. But when they see that your life is already meaningful, your confidence is already strong, and your purpose already gives you direction, the dynamic changes. You are no longer asking them to complete your life. You are simply inviting them to become part of a life that already has meaning. This is why building yourself is the greatest investment you will ever make. Improve your knowledge because wisdom cannot be taken away. Strengthen your discipline because it protects you when emotions become unstable. Care for your health because a strong mind grows more easily in a healthy body. Develop valuable skills because competence creates confidence. Build meaningful friendships because genuine relationships remind you that mutual respect still exists. Every step you take toward becoming a stronger version of yourself reduces the temptation to chase people who have already chosen distance. One of the biggest mistakes people make is believing that becoming valuable means becoming successful only in the eyes of others. They chase status, wealth, or recognition purely to impress the people who once ignored them. But that is still another form of chasing. You are simply chasing admiration instead of attention. True growth has a different motivation. You improve yourself because you refuse to waste the potential you have been given. You become disciplined because your future deserves your best effort. You pursue excellence because you want to live with purpose, not because you want someone else to regret their choices. Eventually, something remarkable begins to happen. The people who once occupied your thoughts every day slowly lose their emotional influence over you. Their opinions become less important. Their silence no longer creates anxiety. Their absence no longer feels like a personal failure. Not because they changed, but because you changed. You built a life so full of purpose that there was no room left for unnecessary emotional dependence. You stopped measuring your worth by who stayed and started measuring it by the person you were becoming. There is a quiet confidence that comes from knowing you can walk away from anything that costs you your dignity. It is not arrogance. It is not indifference. It is the peace that comes from understanding your value does not rise and fall according to another person's choices. The strongest individuals know that rejection is part of life. Disappointment is unavoidable, and not everyone will appreciate them. Yet they continue moving forward because their identity is rooted in character, discipline, and purpose rather than temporary approval. When you reach this point, you no longer fear being ignored because you understand a simple truth. The right people never require you to abandon yourself just to keep them. Those who genuinely belong in your life will appreciate your presence without demanding that you chase them. Those who choose distance are free to make that decision, and you are equally free to continue building a future that does not depend on their recognition. So remember this whenever you feel tempted to chase someone who ignores you. Your greatest victory is not making them notice your absence. Your greatest victory is becoming someone who no longer needs their attention to recognize your own worth. That is where confidence becomes permanent, peace becomes natural, and real personal power begins.